IPPH on air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And because of our commitment to drill down on these issues, we continue our live stream at 3 p.m. State of Play. And today we have two of our regular co-anchors plus a very special guest co-anchor. And so we have Karen Tramontano. Karen was the former Deputy Chief of Staff to President William Jefferson Clinton. She's an international political analyst and co-chair of the Senior Advisory Committee of IPPH. Great to have you with us, Karen.
Thank you, Mayor.
We also have the Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark is the host of the podcast, Make It Plain. He's a regular on MSNBC and a distinguished member of the Senior Advisory Committee of IPPH. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hello, Mayor. Glad to be back again. Thank you.
And today we have as a very special guest co-anchor, Janet Murguia. She is the president and CEO of Unidos US, one of the largest, most effective advocacy organizations in our country. She's a civil rights activist, an advocate, and a distinguished lawyer. Great to have you with us, Janet.
Thank you, Mayor Pratt. Love to be with you. Thank you for including me.
It's great to have you. So today, it appears that President Donald Trump is not going to concede. It's even possible that he will not concede after the Electoral College meets on December 14th. Now, he has chosen the path to sort of go over the cliff of political propriety. What about the lion's share of the Republican Party? They've been awfully quiet. Do you think they're going to go over that cliff too? Karen?
Well, Mayor, the Republican Party has made a choice, and that choice, I believe, is they are choosing to undermine the presidency of Biden. And I think they are doing it much more loudly than they have done it in the past. But I think they've made a clear choice, and we're seeing it every single day. And it is not a choice for democracy. And it really is, there are no excuses. I don't think it's about Georgia. I don't think it's about 70 million plus votes. I think they want to undermine Joe Biden's presidency.
What do you think, Mark?
I would agree with Karen. I also think, because what we are finding as we look at some of the numbers is that Trump, there's a segment of the voting population that votes resoundingly and shows up to the polls even more when Trump is on the ballot. The term that is being used by some pollsters is called, it's not my term, but it's term is being used, they're known as hidden deplorables. I think that what some Republicans are thinking is that they still need Trump's voters, that they may not be inclined or motivated to vote. They may become apathetic if he's not somewhere in the picture. So they have to find a way to, I guess, perpetuate his presence in the political conversation, the political process, even when he's not on the ballot. So that may be what's going on to kind of drag things out. He doesn't concede. He'll have some lingering impact, they hope, in Georgia. But if that theory is true, if in fact he's not on the ballot, it won't make a difference because those individuals may not come out and vote anyway. We hope, I think that's the case, but I think that's probably the underlying strategy.
And Janet, what do you think? Do you think they've just abandoned political propriety and going to go over the cliff with Trump? What do you think?
No, Mayor Pratt, thanks for including me. It's wonderful to be here with Karen and Reverend Mark. But look, I would say yes, by all accounts, we've seen the Republican leadership act in lockstep with President Trump. And that's been the leading example of that has been Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has given him all of this rope, if you will, to continue to take steps to undermine the election and our democracy. I will say this, though. I take great encouragement from the fact that despite the president's efforts, despite the Republicans, sort of really just appearing to continue to support him, a lot of our institutions and individuals within these institutions are standing strong. The local election officials have been, for the most part, performing heroically under very difficult conditions. And we've seen our courts largely reject the frivolous and ridiculous lawsuits from the president. And I think what we're seeing here in the end, despite the Republicans' tacit support and approval of these really unbased allegations by the president, that it won't be President Trump who decides who wins this election. Ultimately, it will be the voters. And so far, I still have confidence in our institutions hanging strong. And I was really reaffirmed by that, by the historic turnout we saw of so many voters across this country. So yes, we have a lot to be concerned about in terms of the actions that are unbased actions that are being taken by President Trump and the Republicans who seem to be going along. But so far, I think I have confidence that because of this turnout and because of the strength of so many of these local heroes and the courts so far, we can have confidence that it will be the voters who decide, not President Trump, who decides the outcome of this election.
Well, you mentioned heroes. That sort of brings up the Heroes Act in my mind. In this environment where there's absolutely no collaboration, as you had, let's say, in the wake of the foreclosure crisis, where President Bush cooperated with President-elect Obama. Here we are, there's no communication, there's no coordination, and yet Americans desperately need money. Individuals are running out of money. Businesses have to hunker down more. They need money. State and local governments have to balance their budget. So if they don't get money, they'll start furloughing. What must the American people do to get the government to act in their own interest? Janet, I'm going to begin with you on that one.
Well, I'll just build on your comments, Mayor. I think when it comes to the pandemic relief, we have the right solution, and it's called the HEROES Act, which was passed by the House of Representatives 6 months ago, I think in May. And in that act are many provisions that would go a long way to addressing and responding to the needs from a health perspective for so many who are hurting, and also economically. And I just have to share that for us, those essential workers who have stepped up in a heroic fashion, who largely represent many across the country, many Latinos and immigrants who stepped in because we disproportionately are represented because only 16% of Hispanics are able to work from home. Our jobs are really in that farm to table sort of pipeline. And we therefore are more at risk. And as you know, Mayor Pratt, from previous shows, we also are susceptible to underlying conditions that the pandemic has exposed. So we do need that assistance. They have a blueprint to build on, and it's the HEROES Act. And we need to keep putting pressure on the Senate, in particular Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, to act because it is urgent and dire.
Karen, what do you think? Is there any way to get them to move? I mean, the Senate has gone home for the holidays. What do you think?
I think there are enough people in the Senate who want to get something done, and the Republican caucus that want to get something done. Murkowski, Collins, even Cassidy, Romney. I think it's going to be, I suspect it will be incremental. Something will get out. It won't be the HEROES Act, and it won't be McConnell's slimmed down version, but it'll be something probably closer to slimmed down so that it can get out of the Senate with President-elect Biden immediately post-inauguration coming back for a second tranche. on that HEROES Act and getting the state and local money out. But, you know, Schumer's got a tough job. He's got to move, you know, 3 to 4 votes because they're not going to vote alone. And right now he needs 4 of them. But I think the sentiment is moving towards getting something done, because you cannot turn on the television without seeing lines and lines of people for food. We have a crisis, and people have to keep up their advocacy for what they need for anything to happen.
Mark, I know that Reverend Barber is talking about having a march. You think that'll help?
I think so. In fact, he's doing a Moral Monday caravan even as we speak, to appeal to Mitch McConnell and others in the Senate. All of these things help. I pray that Karen's optimism comes true. But as we explored in the last question you asked, Mayor, it boils down to whether or not a majority of these Republicans in the Senate are still going to continue to hold to their pact with the devil, so to speak, somehow thinking that they can maintain relevance or stay alive or hold on to their majority by holding up the stimulus this country needs. What we can do, what voters and everybody else who's got good sense in America can do, including, as Janet said, all of those who are disproportionately impacted. It's not just medical workers on the front line, but people who can't work from home, Black and brown people who are in these essential jobs. They go to work, they get infected, get sick, then those businesses have to shut back down again. It's a vicious cycle. The very party that promotes capitalism and free enterprise is causing some businesses to go out of function forever if they don't do something about this money and this stimulus. So what's our incentive? Our incentive is for everybody to do all they can to help Georgia elect these 2 senators so that we can finally, come January, get some type of stimulus done.
Well, I want to ask about the vaccines also. I mean, you got 3 promising vaccines on the horizon, but in order to be effective, as I understand it, they have to be administered to almost every mortal on the planet. And there's a complete absence, again, of collaboration. How do they make this happen? Do you think there's a way they can do this safely and promptly, Karen?
Well, the states have all submitted. So here's where I'm hopeful. The states have all submitted plans. The federal government, because it can't coordinate anything under our current president, will send the vaccines out to the states. So the states have already working with their hospitals, and they've had to do that. So now they've had deep experience with their hospitals, deep experience with their nursing homes. So I think you're going to see that first wave of the vaccine get to frontline workers in hospitals and nursing homes, first responders. My concern, and where I have the big question mark, is where does it go from there? You know, how do the grocery store workers, who again are disproportionately Black and brown people in all of our cities, how does it get to the communities that need it the most? I think the first wave, the states will handle it, but it's got to go much deeper. And that's where I'm very, very concerned. The lack of coordination is really going to hurt.
How about you, Janet?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Karen. This is a major concern for all of us. But, you know, we know that the pharmaceutical companies are working very fast and are tracking, on a pretty good schedule here. But it's also not clear that we're seeing a guarantee around that effective distribution of the vaccine, especially to those who need it most. And we've seen Trump's GSA stonewalling on the election outcome and the transition. That doesn't help, because I do believe it creates real barriers for the Biden team from coordinating with federal government on a vaccine distribution. So without that federal guidance and leadership, this is going to be a very, imperfect process. And we need that federal leadership and guidance, not most recently, Biden was asked to respond, what's the best thing that he can message to folks? And he says, well, help is on the way. But the longer that this administration stonewalls in terms of even basic, coordination with the transition team, I worry for our communities, many Black and Brown, who again are putting themselves out there on the line and need this vaccine and should be prioritized. That equitable distribution is going to be key. We're working directly with vaccine companies. We're working with agencies. We just launched with the NAACP and the COVID Collaborative a whole PSA, because there's many in our communities who are going to have a lot of questions about whether they can take that vaccine and whether it's safe. A major public education campaign is going to be necessary from trusted partners. But we need to know that as we educate our community, that they will be prioritized. And all of that is in flux as long as the Trump administration stonewalls. We need federal leadership. States are going to be important, but federal leadership is key.
No, there's no question about it. How about you, Mark? I'm going to ask another question quickly, but what are your thoughts? Are you concerned?
Yeah, and I don't, as Karen and Jan have alluded to, there's not the capacity, I'd say that as diplomatically as possible, within the Trump administration to oversee this and make it happen. There's not the cooperation in terms of the transition process. Mayor, I've spoken with several people whom you and I know who are still working hard in those DC agencies that you oversaw as mayor. And they've even said to me that the lack of the ascertainment by the GSA secretary and the lack of a transition funds, transition office has even grinded even the inaugural process to a halt. So if you can't even have office space for the presidential inaugural committee, how can we expect this administration to oversee the dissemination of these vaccines? And then Janet is right. I think one of the big complications we're going to have is that our communities, particularly communities of color, have a great deal of apprehension about vaccines and how they'll be distributed. One, whether they'll get them fairly and adequately, and two, whether or not they're safe. So, we're way behind and could have been a lot further if we had a competent administration months ago addressing this COVID crisis.
Yeah. Well, let me ask an easier question. I think it's easier. Governor Newsom will soon have the opportunity to pick the replacement for Senator Kamala Harris once her seat is vacated. Who do you think you ought to pick, Janet?
Well, I have a clear choice, but I have to tell you, I know there's some real tensions out there. But for us in the Latino community, we think it's past time for California to have its first Hispanic senator. There are 15 million of the nation's 60 million Latinos in California. That's 25%. And California, with 7.9 million Latino voters, also holds about a quarter of the US Latino electorate. So, we're 40% of Californians. So we see a need to have that representation finally coming from the state of California. But I know that there are legitimate issues being raised about replacing the Senate slot there with another woman, and perhaps a woman of color. Obviously, we see that as a win-win, but we'd love to see a Hispanic, a Latino be that representative for a state that represents so much of the Hispanic community.
Yeah, it does. How about you, Mark?
I don't envy the governor's position, because what state touts more progressive diversity in politics than California? And Janet's right. It would be wholly appropriate to pick a Latinx person. There's a lot of conversation about an LGBTQIA individual. And then, of course, there are a lot of conversations about African-American women. I think the consensus, though, is a woman. So I think everybody kind of agrees that a woman can cross all of those categories. And every conversation I've seen has been about a woman. So I think that's a good thing. And it was a time when even that was a struggle to get people in the frame of mind of picking women for these kinds of positions. But it's not an easy it's not an easy decision. I think a woman who is in either of those categories or who intersects all of those categories would be ideal.
Okay, how about you, Karen?
Oh boy, I don't want to be the governor, I'll tell you. It is a lose-lose proposition, right? I mean, it could be a win-win, but I think this is one that no one's going to be happy. Yeah, I mean, I think as both Janet and Mark have said, I do think there is a very strong consensus that it needs to be a woman. But where it goes from there, like I said, I
Okay.
don't want to be in his shoes.
Well, we talked about the Democrats. How about the Republicans? We're going to have a January 5th runoff. 2 senatorial seats will be up. Everybody's going to throw everything at it. Do you think we'll have a sense of the Republican Party of the future through that election process? And will we likely see it still remain the Donald J. Trump party? What do you think, Karen?
I think it's definitely going to be the Donald J. Trump party. He's going to still be in office. And I just reflect upon the candidates, right? It is the Republican Party as we have come to know it. One candidate is Wall Street, married to the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange, accused of selling shares that she had interest in when she heard about the secret briefing and on COVID. The other candidate has done the same, cared more about his stock portfolio than passing the HEROES Act. So I think the Republican Party is the party that we have come to know. My only question, and Mark raised it earlier, with Trump not actually being on the ballot, how does that play out? I know that Democrats are geared up for this one. There's a lot of excitement, and we did it once. Can we do it again? And I think that's the big question. But I think the Republican Party, they are who they are, and they're showing it in their candidacies.
Well, Donald Trump undoubtedly is going to campaign intensely on January 5th. How do you think it'll play out, Mark?
Well, I don't know. I mean, unless he can be convinced that it may hurt them January 5th, and it very well could. It could mobilize more of us to the polls. In terms of what this Republican Party will be, I think for the time being, it's going to remain Donald Trump's party. It's going to take a couple of years for other Republicans to emerge to challenge the hold he has on the party. And there's still Republicans who feel he hijacked the party in 2016. And I know the Lincoln Project and other entities are working very, very hard to try to get the Republican Party back. But as I said earlier, there is this group of voters that the Mitch McConnells and the Kelly Loefflers and the Perdues are going to still try to appeal to. And the networks don't just have Fox anymore. People have gone further right than Fox, the OAN network and these other networks. And who knows, Trump may establish a network as well. As long as they continue to promote what is truly a post-factual culture in America and cultivate these types of voters, that potential will continue to exist for him to have control. But I'm hopeful that there's some others who are going to stand up and say enough is enough. We'll know about it.
I'm going to ask you finally, Janet, the same question, and it'll be interesting. We'll have to do it in the future, talk about why it is a party of more seemingly like a cult of personality than the basic principles. But what do you think, Janet, in terms of January 5th?
Yeah, look, I think all of us were a little bit surprised, not at the fact that there's still division in this country, but not to see a broader and deeper repudiation of President Trump and his tone and his tactics and his policies. But having said that, I think, yes, Trump will exit the White House one way or the other. And, but he won't exit the center stage and the dialogue. And the party will still continue to be, I think, not led by him, but sort of run in fear of him. And the fact that he's freezing out other candidates, even for 2024, with this sort of hint that he's going to come back. So I think that does create a lot of problems in terms of any future change for the Republican Party. I will say that in Georgia, though, I think we see an Abrams party emerging that could be a challenge to what we've seen in terms of the Republican Trump-led efforts. And, we've worked in coalition with Stacey Abrams to mobilize voters. And I think the groups that have the best plan for turning out voters are going to win in Georgia. And we've seen a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational historic coalition come together. There's 5% of voters in Georgia are Hispanic or Latino or Latinx. When the margins are so close, we can all make a difference. And it's going to be really important for us to mobilize, and not stop until we see the outcome on that election. And 2 Senate seats are in play. The shift of the majority of who controls the Senate is in play. The stakes could not be higher. So we're going to continue to focus on getting out the vote and making sure that every vote gets counted on January 5th.
Well, it's definitely not politics as usual. It's politics unusual these days. And that's why it's so important to keep drilling down on these touchstone issues. Well, thank you very much, Karen, Mark, and Janet. You guys have been terrific. Thank you to our IPPH on Air audience. You can continue to follow us at Politics, History, and History. Now I've forgotten it. Politics, Policy, and History. You can do Facebook and Instagram there. And then for Twitter, it's at Politics Policy One. So until next time at 3 p.m., I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH on Air's State of Play.